which is an inconsistent player, not accurate, bad decisions. He's just not any good.
The Cleveland Browns front office does not want you to think too hard about what happened at minicamp. They would prefer you stay distracted, stay confused, stay focused on the noise. Because the moment you actually look at what Shedeur Sanders did to Deshaun Watson on that practice field, the entire fiction they have been selling you since draft night comes crashing down in real time. Shedeur Sanders, a second-year player, a fifth-round pick. The guy the establishment spent months telling you was too slow, too arrogant, too raw, too everything, that guy just walked into Cleveland Browns minicamp and exposed a 9-year NFL veteran in front of everyone watching. And the people running this league's narrative machine are not ready to have that conversation honestly. Welcome back. This is Hot News, and today we are ripping the doors off the Browns quarterback situation and exposing the rigged framing that has been designed from the beginning to make Shedeur Sanders lose no matter what he does. Let me be entirely clear with you right now. This is not a simple quarterback competition story. It never was. The moment the Cleveland Browns brought Deshaun Watson back into the conversation, reportedly, per Ocho, as a potential starter for at least the first few weeks of the season, potentially leading them out against the Jacksonville Jaguars in Week 1, the moment that happened, a trap was set. And the trap was not set for Deshaun Watson. The trap was set for Shedeur Sanders. I need you to understand that before we go one step further, because everything that follows makes no sense unless you see the trap first. Here is what the establishment does not want you to look at. Deshaun Watson came into this minicamp in a brand new offense, a new environment, a completely fresh system, and according to beat reporters who were actually on that field, he produced some of the best throws of camp. And then he followed them up with some of the worst throws you will ever see from a professional quarterback. Not some of the worst throws from a backup, not some of the worst throws from a developmental guy, some of the worst throws you will ever see, period. From a 10-year NFL veteran. That is the direct read from people who were standing there watching it happen. The best throws of camp, and then the worst throws you have ever seen, back to back, from the same quarterback, in the same practice. That is not a player who is trending upward. That is not a player who is turning a corner. That is not a player who has anything left to prove that he has not already proven, and what he has proven in Cleveland is that he cannot sustain it. Now sit with that for a second. Because the analytical framing that followed from beat-level observers was brutally precise. The conclusion drawn after this spring was not a hopeful one. It was not he looked rusty but promising. The conclusion was that Deshaun Watson is the same player he has been since arriving in Cleveland. Inconsistent, inaccurate, bad decision-making, not any good. Those are not my words. Those are the words of people who covered this team, who went to the open camp, who watched every rep, and the verdict was delivered with a kind of finality that should terrify every single person in the Browns front office who still has Watson's name penciled anywhere near a Week 1 depth chart. And here is where the framing becomes absolutely undeniably corrupt. Because while Watson was producing this catastrophic inconsistency, the best throw of camp followed immediately by throws so bad that observers could not even process what they were seeing. Shedeur Sanders was holding his own, a second-year player in a completely new offense, learning a brand new system from scratch, competing against a 9-year veteran on pre-snap reads, on mental processing, on all the things the doubters said would be his weakness. And the pads were not even on yet. The pads were not on. Which means by every metric the critics used to dismiss Shedeur, he should have been at his worst relative to Watson. He should have been getting exposed on the mental side of the game, the veteran awareness side, the side where experience is supposed to be the great equalizer. And instead, the competition was close enough that people who were there were asking out loud, why is it even close? If Watson is this experienced, if he has this much pedigree, if he played at a genuinely elite level before Cleveland, then why can he not separate himself from a second-year player who the media spent the entire offseason telling us had the lowest QBR and no future in this league? I want you to really process that question, because it exposes the trap I was telling you about at the top of this video. The trap works like this. The establishment, the media apparatus, the people who set the narrative around this team, built a no-win scenario for Shedeur Sanders. If Shedeur loses the competition to Deshaun Watson, the narrative becomes, he lost to a broken quarterback. He could not even beat the worst version of a player who has not performed at a high level since arriving in Cleveland. He deserves to be cut. If Shedeur wins the competition, the narrative becomes, well, you only beat Deshaun Watson. You were supposed to beat him. That does not mean anything. That does not prove anything. You only beat the guy everyone knows is done. There is no version of this competition where the establishment gives Shedeur Sanders full credit. There is no version where they move the goalposts back to where they belong and say plainly and honestly that beating a 10-year NFL veteran who had the potential to play at an MVP level, beating that man in a quarterback competition as a second-year player in a brand new offense, is an absolute undeniable achievement, and I need to name what this is. This is a deliberate, ruthless, pre-constructed narrative designed to protect the people who made the worst trade in NFL history. Because that is what the Deshaun Watson trade was. The worst trade in the history of the NFL. Full stop. And the people who made that trade, the front office, the decision makers who handed over that contract, who built an entire organizational identity around a quarterback who then played only 28% of his snaps and could not sustain anything resembling his former level. Those people have a vested interest in making sure the conversation never lands squarely on their catastrophic failure. And the easiest way to protect that failure is to make Shedeur Sanders the story. Make him the problem. Make him the guy who cannot win no matter what he does. Because if Shedeur is the problem, then nobody has to answer for the decision that broke this franchise. Let me give you the full context on Deshaun Watson, because it matters and it is being deliberately distorted in both directions. This was a quarterback who played at a genuinely historically high level before Cleveland. We are not going to pretend that never happened. He was on pace for a historic rookie season before a knee injury cut it short. He played behind offensive lines that were, to put it charitably, disastrous. He was a player with legitimate MVP-level upside. And that is not revisionism. That is the documented record of what he was before everything fell apart. The problem is not that the Browns believed in that version of Deshaun Watson. The problem is that they paid for that version of Deshaun Watson at a time when the evidence was already mounting that the version they were paying for no longer existed, and then they watched him play only 28% of his snaps. 28%. And then they watched him produce this spring, the best throw of camp, followed by the worst throws you will ever see, and somehow the conversation is still about whether he should start week 1 against Jacksonville. That is baffling. That is soul-crushing for every Browns fan who has been watching this franchise make decision after catastrophic decision, and the beat reporters who covered this minicamp are not being subtle about it. The assessment was plain. There are simply too many inexplicable, baffling, confounding throws for a 10-year veteran. Too many. The kind of throws that make observers who are standing right there, who have covered this team for years, genuinely unable to fathom what they are watching. That is the Deshaun Watson of this minicamp, and the Cleveland Browns of 2026, who are supposed to be playing for the future, have no business putting that quarterback on the field ahead of Shedeur Sanders. Now let me talk about what Shedeur actually accomplished last season, because the establishment absolutely does not want you to look at this. A year ago, exactly a year ago, Shedeur Sanders was buried on the depth chart, 4th on the depth chart. Tyler Huntley was coming in. Dillon Gabriel was being positioned as the legitimate number 2, and people were saying daily that Shedeur was not going to make the team, because 5th-round picks do not always make the team. That was the conversation. That was the real, documented, on-the-record conversation happening around this franchise. And then look what happened. He went from buried on a depth chart to leading a game-winning drive. He became the first rookie quarterback on this team to have a 300-yard game. He won more games as a starter than any other Browns quarterback who started that season. He made the Pro Bowl, as a 5th-round pick who people were saying would not make the roster. A year ago, if you had said those words out loud, Shedeur Sanders, 300-yard game, game-winning drive, Pro Bowl, you would have been called delusional. You would have been dismissed. And the people doing the dismissing are the same people now trying to tell you that beating Deshaun Watson in a minicamp competition does not count for anything. Here is what that tells us about the broader situation. The narrative apparatus around this team has been consistently deliberately wrong about Shedeur Sanders at every single turn. They were wrong when they said he would not make the roster. They were wrong when they buried him on the depth chart. They were wrong when they said the 300-yard game was a fluke, and they are wrong now when they construct a no-win framing around a quarterback competition that Shedeur is clearly holding his own in against a 9-year veteran in a brand new offense without pads on. The fan base sees it. The people who are actually paying attention see it. The sentiment circulating among Browns fans right now is not complicated. The idea of the Browns shelving Shedeur Sanders and forcing their fan base to watch Deshaun Watson start games in 2026 is generating a level of outrage that the front office should be paying very close attention to. And it is not just the loudest voices. Observers who track this team analytically, people who are critical of every quarterback on the roster and not simply Shedeur cheerleaders, are arriving at the same conclusion. Watson is the same player he has been in Cleveland, the same inconsistency, the same inaccuracy, the same bad decisions. And a team that is playing for the future has no rational argument for starting him. 7 out of 10 Browns fans, 7 out of 10, maybe 8 out of 10, would rather have Shedeur Sanders starting for them this year. That is not a fringe position. That is the overwhelming consensus of the people who actually watch this team, who care about this franchise, who show up and invest emotionally and financially in what happens on that field. And the front office, with Andrew Berry involved in these decisions, needs to be honest about what the future looks like. Because the future does not involve Deshaun Watson. The future of this franchise runs directly through Shedeur Sanders. And every week they delay that reality is a week they are burning the goodwill of a fan base that has already been through enough. I want to be completely honest with you about what the stakes are here, because this is not just a minicamp story. This is a franchise-defining moment. The Cleveland Browns are at a crossroads that every team eventually reaches, the moment where you have to choose between protecting the decisions of the past and building honestly toward the future. The worst contract in NFL history is already on the books. That damage is done. The question now is whether the organization compounds that damage by starting the wrong quarterback in 2026, wasting developmental reps that Shedeur Sanders needs, and sending a message to the entire league that this franchise values institutional ego over competitive reality. Because if you are Andrew Berry, if you are anyone in that building with decision-making authority, and you watch what happened at minicamp, Watson producing inexplicable, baffling throws that observers could not fathom from a 10-year veteran, while Shedeur holds his own in a brand new system against that same veteran, and your conclusion is that Watson should start Week 1 against Jacksonville, then you have chosen the past over the future. You have chosen to protect the narrative over the truth. And here is the thing about the Jacksonville game specifically. Shedeur Sanders against the Jaguars in Week 1 is a matchup that makes football sense. It is a game where a young quarterback can get his feet under him, build confidence, establish rhythm with his weapons, and begin the process of becoming the franchise player this team needs him to be. Deshaun Watson against the Jaguars in Week 1 is a gamble on a player who has not shown he can sustain anything, who produced confounding throws at minicamp, and who the entire analytical community has already written off as a player who will never take the next step. The Deshaun Watson of his peak years is the Deshaun Watson of his peak years. That player is not walking through that door in Cleveland in 2026. I am going to put my name on this. I am going on the record right now. Shedeur Sanders will win this quarterback competition. Not because Deshaun Watson is worthless, he had real talent, he played at a genuinely high level before Cleveland, and we are not going to pretend otherwise, but because the evidence from minicamp, the evidence from last season, the evidence from every observable data point we have access to, all points in the same direction. Shedeur Sanders is ascending, Deshaun Watson is not. And if the Cleveland Browns start Deshaun Watson in Week 1 against Jacksonville, while Shedeur Sanders sits on the bench, come back to this video and hold me accountable in the comments, but I am not wrong. The pattern is too clean. The minicamp evidence is too clear. The Browns front office has too much invested in getting this right to keep getting it wrong. And Shedeur Sanders is right now, today, in a new offense, without pads, competing with a 9-year veteran, and making it look closer than it has any business being, which means when the pads come on, when the real reps happen, when the lights get brighter, the gap is only going to widen. Shedeur Sanders is a Pro Bowl quarterback. He is a game-winning drive quarterback. He is a 300-yard game quarterback. He is all of those things as a second-year player who was told he would not make the roster, who was buried on a depth chart, who was dismissed at every single turn by the same establishment that is now trying to construct a no-win narrative around his minicamp performance. That is who Shedeur Sanders is, and the Cleveland Browns front office is running out of time to acknowledge it. Drop your most honest take in the comments right now. Is Shedeur Sanders already the undisputed starting quarterback of the Cleveland Browns? Yes or no? One word. Pick a side. I want every opinion that is willing to commit, because the fence sitting on this question is over. Minicamp happened. The evidence is in. It is time to take a position. Hit the notification bell because this quarterback battle is about to reach its breaking point, and when the decision comes down, you are going to want to be here for it. We will see you in the next video.
Deshaun Watson is always going to look good with shorts and helmets.
And there's no point point in the Cleveland Browns of 2026 who are playing for the future playing in here, which is an inconsistent player, not accurate, bad decisions. He's just not any good.
Deshaun Watson is always going to look good with shorts and helmets.
And there's no point in the Cleveland Browns of 2026 who are playing for the future playing.